Now we're going to look at triggers. Triggers are just a simple way of you connecting your product to something else so that every time they think of that product, they also think of yours. And a really good example of that is peanut butter and jelly. It's pretty hard to think of peanut butter without also thinking of jelly. And jelly is the lesser of the two, so jelly benefits from the trigger. And that's really what this chapter is all about, is trying to find those things that you can connect your product to that will help people think about it or remember it. If you get a chance, you should go in, well, you should be reading the book anyway, but you should concentrate or focus on the section about buzz agents. And buzz agents is an interesting section because it looks to find those people who are out in the audience that are interested in your product in the first place or interested in your topic, and then using those people to drive buzz. And I think that that's a really interesting and important part. I think it goes back to the, find the one to drive the 10 philosophy. But there's a whole section on that in Chapter 2. And this particular slide deals with, which one gets more press, right? Do we think about and talk about Cheerios more than we think about and talk about Disney? The logical thought process here is Cheerios are pretty boring, and so Disney would be the one that benefits the most from buzz, right, from being talked about. But the fact is that there's two different types of word of mouth. The first is immediate, and the second is ongoing or sustained. Immediate is you happen to be going on a vacation and you're looking at things and Disney comes up. The sustained or ongoing is more for the Cheerios. I mean, Cheerios is something that we have every day, so it's more talked about. It has more buzz about it than does Disney. But it almost is counterintuitive to think that we would talk about something as mundane as Cheerios. But remember, we have a tendency to talk about personal experiences. So the types of products that would need immediate word of mouth would be things like vacations, because they're not something we do all the time. Nonprofits would need, ongoing as well as immediate, and movies. A movie comes out and it needs that immediate word of mouth, because after a couple of weeks, nobody talks about that product anymore. So this chapter also looks at word of mouth from the ongoing and sustained or the immediate, and what kinds of products we talk about more frequently. So timing, context, and consistency are very important when you're talking about a trigger. So timing does matter. So for example, Mars Bar tried to partner with the Pathfinder mission that was going to Mars, because they thought, well, that's kind of cool, right? There's a Pathfinder mission going to Mars, and so we'll associate with that. The astronauts going to Mars for Pathfinder use a Mars bar. And that's great. It's really an excellent idea. The challenge is that is a once-in-a-lifetime thing. It's not going to happen over and over and over again, so that trigger doesn't have a lot of longevity to it. And it was important, the timing was good when the Mars Pathfinder was going to Mars, but that didn't happen all the time, so it couldn't be sustained. And so the context is very limited. What you really want to do is you want to find something that's something we do all the time, that's current, and that you can attach to, and the timing is a little bit more varied than it was for the Mars bar. So now, in comparison to the Mars Pathfinder, which was an issue that only came up periodically, take a look at what the marketing manager at KitKat did. The marketing manager at KitKat was looking to find a good trigger that she could associate with KitKat, something that was more common than her KitKat bars were, and something that was ongoing. So she came up with "Give me a break me off a piece of that KitKat bar" as part of a coffee break, something people take all the time, every day while they're at work. And it was brilliant, and it worked really well. So if you want, you can go in and just recheck the statistics on that in the book. But by triggering every time somebody thinks of a coffee break, they think of a KitKat bar, right? This was brilliant because there's so many of these that take place. It's similar to the concept of peanut butter and jelly, right? The jelly manufacturers benefit if they can associate themselves with peanut butter, because peanut butter is sold 4 times as much as jelly. So whatever is top of mind, whatever we do, whichever one has to trigger off of the other, you want to be the one that's finding the bigger trigger to associate with yourself. And finding a good trigger is not as easy as it sounds. The Pathfinder with the Mars bars sounded like a good trigger, but again, it was limited in time, right? And it wasn't going to happen all the time. In comparison, when you look at Kit Kat and a coffee break, that is a trigger that goes together very well. Not forget that we're a marketing class. So we want to look at it from a marketing perspective. Why do we care as marketers? Well, as marketers, if you can get your product thought of twice as often, 4 times as often, as in the case of jelly, 4 times as often by associating yourself with a trigger, why wouldn't you do that, right? You're going to have the natural people who are going to check into jelly, but now you want to have not only the people who check into jelly, but are also checking into peanut butter by associating yourself with peanut butter. So you get the jelly association and 4 times the peanut butter association. So why we care is because top of mind means action. When it sits at the top of our mind, we are more likely to buy and we're more likely to have action. We care because triggers work. Break Me Off a Piece of That Kit Kat bar was a very highly successful program. And it was successful because triggers, trying to associate or put yourself with something else so you can get more sales, works. So there are a couple of pretty good examples of the concept of triggers in the book. There's lots of really good examples, but a couple I want to mention is the music and the wine is the first. So they did a little bit of a survey to see if they played different type of wine, different type of music in the grocery store, if different wines would sell more frequently. So if they played, for example, Papa German music, would more German wines sell? If they played Italian music, would more Italian wine sell? If they played French music, would more French wine sell? And surprisingly enough, what they determined is, yes, the music that's played in the background could trigger, right? Because remember, we're sensory-based beings, could trigger us to buy that particular type of wine. So it's kind of an interesting research study that was done. The second thing that they looked at were the voting booths at schools. It used to be that most of the votes that were taken in small towns were taken in the town hall or something like that. They found when they moved the voting booths to the school, people were more apt to support the school agenda items that were on the ballot than when they weren't in the school. So it's like it acted like a trigger, right? You're in the school, you're doing your vote, there's warrant articles or voting issues on there about the school, so you're more likely to support it. And when it was in the town, it was the opposite. You were more likely to support the town issues. So this is another example of how triggers can work. And then you take into consideration timing. So I don't know how many of you use reusable grocery bags, but if you're like me, most of the time I get to the grocery store and I go, oh, I forgot the bags. Because that's when the trigger happens for me. It doesn't happen when I'm walking out the door to go to the grocery store. It happens when I'm in the grocery store parking lot. That's when I think of the reusable grocery bags. Sometimes, actually, I think of it when I'm in the grocery store. So timing is very important. You have to understand when people associate the two triggers together so that you can put them together at the right time. It doesn't do you any good to put grocery bags together with the grocery store when I'm at home because I'm still not going to remember it. You need to find a way to get me to keep it in the car and then trigger me, maybe with a sign out front, of the grocery store that says, walk back to your car and get your grocery bags. So you have to think about how and when the trigger is appropriate. So what makes for a strong trigger? Well, a strong trigger can actually be better than a great slogan. Research has shown that you can have a good slogan, but a trigger actually works better because it associates you more often, more frequently. I call it association. The book calls it triggers. When I think of it, I think of you trying to pair your concept, your idea, your product with something else. So I think of it as an association. Something that naturally goes together, because triggers have to go together. So in my opinion, they're a bit more of an association. And of course, you have to have really good timing. I already mentioned this, but I think it suits us to mention it again. There has to be a level of frequency to the trigger you select. If you select something that doesn't have often, isn't often thought of or doesn't have an extensive trigger, then it's not going to do you a heck of a lot of good. As I mentioned, the Pathfinder only takes place once every 400 years or 40 years or whatever it is. So it's not a good trigger because you can't continue to sustain it and use it. And candy bars are a product that you have to continue to have a sustained trigger with. Even the Olympics, I'm not 100% sure that they're a great trigger. I mean, they're better now because they happen every 2 years versus the way they were every 4 years. But still, there's a long timeline between the trigger of the Olympics and the product. So if it's a product that somebody doesn't buy but every couple of years, maybe it's a great way to collect and trigger. You want something that people think of all the time, and that's why the Kit Kat and the coffee break were great, because it's something that you think of on a regular basis. So we also have to think about the delivery of the message, right? If you step out of your tub onto a tile floor and you constantly keep slipping and you keep thinking to yourself in the back of your mind, I want to buy a bath mat for that bathroom because, one of these times I'm going to go down. The chances of you remembering that, even when you're in the store and you walk past the bath mats, is not very good. So you need to have, you can see it on TV. You can see a commercial that says, don't slip coming out of your bathtub. Make sure you have a bath mat. But it's really when you're in the store that the trigger has to happen. So if you are the bath mat company, you may want to run a small video or have a sign that says, do you slip in your bathroom? Because that will be the trigger to remind you to buy the product. So triggers are really important. You have to think about when the person thinks about it. You have to think about what situation people would want to buy your product for. So if you're a bath mat company and you're trying to sell people on the concept of not slipping and falling in their bathroom, then that's the way you have to trigger it.